subscribe and click the bell icon to turn on notifications.
Well, hello everyone. Welcome to today's webinar on a really popular topic in Excel, and that is lookup functions. Now, before we kind of jump into the content for today, I'll just briefly introduce myself because I know that we do always have new people on our webinars. My name's Deborah Ashby. I'm an IT trainer, and I basically specialize in the design, delivery, and facilitation of Microsoft courses, both online and in the classroom. And today we're going to explore the wonderful world of lookup functions in Excel, just what we need on a sunny Thursday afternoon. It's very sunny in the UK this week. We're all a little bit shocked by that, but it's not normally this sunny at this time of the year. So thank you for giving up the sunshine wherever you are to come and spend an hour learning some Excel. Now, when it comes to lookup functions, it might be that you have maybe a little bit of experience with lookup functions. I think most people are reasonably familiar, if they do know any lookup functions, with Vlookup. Maybe you've practiced, maybe you've got some basic skills there. If you haven't and you're coming here completely not knowing anything about lookup functions, that's absolutely fine. As always, I'm going to try and cater to all different skill levels. We're going to start basic and work our way up. So this session is definitely going to be worth your time, as knowing how to use lookup functions is really an essential skill for everyone, regardless of job role. You really need to have this in your Excel toolkit, particularly if you work with Excel every single day. So let's start out by taking a look at what we've got on the agenda today. There are loads and loads of lookup functions. Obviously, we can't cover them all in an hour, so I've tried to cherry pick the highlights, a best of, greatest hits, we'll call it. So let's take a look at what we've got on the agenda. So we're going to start out with a very basic concept. What are lookup functions? Why are they useful? Why do we need to know them? And I'm going to illustrate this point by just showing you a very basic example of a lookup so you kind of know what we're doing with them. We're then going to dive into everybody's favorite Vlookup. And there's two different ways that you can do a Vlookup. You can do a Vlookup using an exact match, or you can do a Vlookup with approximate match. So we're going to explore both of those. Sometimes people find Vlookups a little bit difficult, but they're actually really easy if you break them down into different steps. So we're going to go through it so that you understand. We're then going to move on to talking about Hlookup. Now, if you're wondering what the difference is between these two, Vlookup stands for vertical lookup and Hlookup stands for horizontal lookup. So we'll look at an example of that as well. And then once I've taught you all of that, I'm then going to tell you why sometimes using Vlookup isn't the best way to go. There are definitely some limitations with Vlookup. We're then going to move on to taking a look at how we can do more complex and flexible lookups using two different functions, index and match. And then I'm going to show you how you can do lookups using one of the newer features or functions, I should say, in Excel, and that is Xlookup. Now, Xlookup is only available if you have Excel for Microsoft 365. You should already have Xlookup, and also the latest standalone version of Excel, which is Excel 2021. We're then going to look at a couple of other lookup functions. Another new one, I'm going to show you how unique works, because this is a function that I use all the time, and it is actually considered a lookup function. We're going to throw in a bit of data validation simply because it works quite well with what we're doing. I'm going to show you how you can perform two-way lookups. And then at the end, we're going to go through another lookup function, which is the choose function. So that's what's on the agenda. I hope that's what you were expecting, or something similar to that. If not, feel free to log off. That's fine. So let's start out by talking about what are lookup functions. Well, lookup functions essentially allow us to look up information. It allows us to use a lookup value and look that up in a table and then return a value from a different column or row. Now, that is really difficult to try and visualize without seeing an example. So let's take a look at a basic example so that we're all starting off from the same page. So I'm going to come out of my PowerPoint presentation And I'm now going to dive into that file that I put into the chat. So now is the time for you guys to open that up if you haven't already. This is the file that we're going to be using. All right, so let's go to our first very basic example. Now, as I said, I'm going to zoom in a little bit to make that a bit bigger. All right. So what we have here is just a very basic table of information. It's not formatted as a table. It's just what I've typed into these cells. We have a column with employees, a column with departments, and a column with their salaries. And basically, my manager has said to me, I want you to put together a formula where I can type in the employee name and it's going to tell me what their salary is. So I've used a lookup function to do this. And if you take a look up in the formula bar, you can see that I've used a Vlookup. So what exactly is going on here? Well, the way that a lookup function works is that we can tell it something to look up. So in this case, I'm telling it to look up the employee name Claire. I want it to look up this employee name in this table, and then I want it to return what we have in the salary column. So it's going to find Claire and return her salary. If I was to change the employee names, let's go for Mike, it's going to update and it's going to return me his salary. So this is the basic premise behind lookup functions. We're taking a value, we're looking it up in a table, and we're returning something else. It's a really powerful function. So that's a very basic example. The thing really to remember here is that the lookup value that you use, in this case, the employee name, has to exist in the table. It has to exist in the table to know what to return. Okay, really important point. So with that in mind, let's move on to taking a look at another example of Vlookup. And as I said, there are two ways you can do it, exact or approximate match. So we'll look at the most common one first, which is Vlookup exact match. So we're going to move on to our next example. Now, what I have on the page here, again, a very small example, I have some part numbers listed. And what I want to do is find out the description for that part number and the unit price for that part number. Now I have this information stored on another worksheet, the parts catalog worksheet. You can see here in column A, I have all of the part numbers. I then have the descriptions and I then have the prices. So effectively what I want to do is I want to perform a lookup. We're going to use the part number as the lookup value because that's the thing that exists in both tables. And I want it to return the description and then the unit price. Now, the way that I like to do this, and this is a little tip, you don't have to do this, but it does make your life a lot easier, is when you have a table like this, and this is going to be our lookup table, what we're looking information up in. Instead of having to go in and select the entire table every time, you might have a very, very long table. I always like to name this as a range to make it a lot easier when I'm putting together my Vlookup. If you've never named ranges before, don't worry, it's not particularly difficult. All we're doing here is basically selecting a cell range and giving it a meaningful name, which we can then use in our formulas. So I'm going to name this entire table, I'm going to give it a name. So Control A is going to select all of my data. Just above where it says part catalog, where it currently says B7, we have our name box. So this is a really quick way of just naming this range of data. So I'm going to click in here and I'm going to call this parts underscore catalog. Now, really important, when you're naming ranges, you can't have a space separating your words. You have to either make it all one word or separate with underscores, as I've done here. So now this range of cells, this table effectively, is named parts catalog. It's going to make it a lot easier for me to use in my Vlookup. So let's construct our Vlookup. Now, before we get going on that, I should mention, if we jump up to the Formulas tab, if you're wondering where Vlookup lives in your function library, you're going to find it underneath Lookup and Reference. It's all the way down the bottom just here. So if you're somebody who prefers to use the function arguments dialog box as opposed to typing it directly into the cell, this is where you can do it from. Now, we're not going to do it that way. We're just going to type it straight in. And I think I'll zoom in a little bit as well so you can see this a bit better. All right, so the first thing we want to return here is the description for the part number. Now, if we type in equals Vlookup, and we can press the tab key to put that first bracket in, let's take a look at our arguments. The first argument here is the lookup value. So our lookup value is going to be that part number because that's what we're looking up in the table. We then need to provide the table array, so what we're looking up in, so it's going to be that parts catalog table. The third argument is the column index number. Now, what is that? Well, the column index number is basically the column number that we want to return. So if we just come out of here a moment and go back to our parts catalog, what do I want to return? I want to return the description. Now, the way that Vlookup looks at this type of data is it numbers columns from left to right. So your part number is column number 1, description is column number 2, and the price is column number 3. So if I want to return the description, that's going to be column number 2. That's what we're going to have for our third argument. So let's do that first of all. Let's go for Vlookup. Our lookup value is going to be what we have in cell A5. Now I'm going to copy this formula down so I don't need to lock that value. Let's comma to move on to our next argument. The next argument is our table array. So this is where we need to go in and select our parts catalog. Now you could jump across to the other worksheet and just select the cell range, but if you have a very large data set, that can be a little bit tedious, which is why I like to give it a name, because at this stage, all you then have to do is press the F3 key on your keyboard, and there is your named range. It's so much easier to do it that way. So that is what we're looking up the part number in the parts catalog. We then need to specify what we want to return. So we want to return the description, which we already established is column number 2. And then the final argument on the end here is an optional argument. How do we know it's optional? It's in square brackets. So I don't have to add an argument onto the end here. If I was just to close the bracket and hit enter, by default, Vlookup is going to do an exact match, which is what we're doing in this example anyway. But if I do type a comma, I get the option of true, which is an approximate match. We're going to do that in the next example, or a false, an exact match. And what this false argument will basically do is we're saying we want to exactly match that part number in the parts catalog. So let's close off our bracket. If you want to stay in the same cell so that you can copy down, remember you can do Control Enter, and that will leave you in the same cell. So it's returned our description. Double click to copy down. Now notice that one of these parts, we have an NA in here, and I'm going to show you how we can deal with that type of situation in a moment. Let's first move on and just complete our unit price column. Now this is going to be exactly the same. The only difference is the column that we're returning. So instead of returning column 2 this time, we want to return the price, which is column number 3. So same process, Vlookup. Our lookup value is the part number. Our table array, well, we named our table, so I can press the F3 key. We can select parts catalog. What column do we want to return? We want to return the price, which is column number 3. And then we want to exactly match the part number, so we need a false argument. Remember, when you have true or false on the end, you can substitute them with 1 for true or 0 for false. So I could put a 0 on the end here, or because false is the default, I don't have to put anything on the end here. Now we're going to put a 0. Let's close the bracket, Control Enter to stay in that same cell, which makes it a lot easier for us to just double click and copy that down. So that is a VLOOKUP in its most basic form. It's not that difficult when you break it down. Now, as I said, you can see that we've got these horrible NA errors occurring in here. Now, why might I be getting those? Well, I'm going to guess that this part number probably doesn't exist in the parts catalog. So I could go through and maybe do something like a find, so Control F. I could look for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 and see if I can find it, which I can't. So that is why I'm getting the NA error, because it can't find that part number. Now, one thing with Excel that we always recommend you do is add in some error handling into your formulas, because if I was going to share this with one of my team colleagues and they just see NAs or errors all over the place, they might get a bit worried. They might think, well, have I touched something? Have I changed a formula? You might want to make this a little bit more explanatory so that everybody can understand what's going on here. So I'm going to add some error checking into my VLOOKUP formula. Now, notice that the errors that we have here are NA errors. And there is a formula in Excel specifically for dealing with or giving meaning to NA errors. So I'm going to click up in cell B5 where we have our first VLOOKUP. I'm working up in the formula bar now, and I'm just going to wrap this VLOOKUP in an if NA. Now, notice that underneath there are two arguments for if NA, value and value if NA. Now, the value of this cell is going to be generated by the VLOOKUP. So I can click at the end, comma. Now I can specify what I want it to say if it doesn't find the lookup value in the table. So I'm going to get it to say part not found. Now remember, when you're dealing with text in your formulas, they must always be enclosed in double quotes. You can close off our if NA, Control Enter, and now if we double click to recopy this down, notice that it says part not found as opposed to NA. So that's a lot easier for users to understand as opposed to just NA errors everywhere. We can do the same over here. So let's click up in the formula bar. We're going to wrap our VLOOKUP in an if NA. Let's go to the end and specify what we want it to say. So I'm going to say price not found in quote marks. Control Enter. And then when we double click, that's now a lot more meaningful. So that is how you can combine a VLOOKUP with a little bit of error handling just to make this more meaningful. Okay, so VLOOKUP, not as scary as it might first seem. Let's move across to taking a look at an example of that true argument on the end. So the last VLOOKUP we did, we had false on the end. That's when we're doing an exact match. We're exactly looking for the part number in the table. But this example, we can't do an exact match. So let's take a look at it. What I have in this first table are basically some salary ranges. And then on the end here, we have the tax rate that's applied for each of these salary ranges. Now, what I'm aiming to do here in this other small table is I want to find out what the tax rate is for these different salaries. Now, if we take the first one here of $55,000, if I look in my table, I don't have $55,000 listed anywhere exactly. 55,000 is kind of going to fall within this range just here. So because I'm not looking for an exact match, I need to have a true argument on the end, or an approximate match on the end, as opposed to an exact match. Okay, so this is where this true argument comes in. So let's take a look at how this works. Pretty much the same. We're going to go the VLOOKUP, open a bracket. Our lookup value, well, this time it's going to be what we have in cell E5. Table array. Now, I didn't give this table a name. So let's take a look at how we would do it if we don't name our tables. All we need to do is select the table where we want to look up the information. Now, one extra thing you need to do here, if you intend on copying this formula down, remember that's going to move your table cell range as well, unless you lock the table in place. So at this stage, we need to press F4 on our keyboard to keep that table locked in place. We then specify the column index number. So what do we want to return? We want to return the tax rate. Now remember, with Vlookup, you number columns from left to right. So the tax rate column is column number 3. What are we doing here? Are we doing an exact match? Are we exactly matching 55,000 in the table? No, we're not. So we want to have a true argument on the end here. Close the bracket, Control, Enter, and that's going to give us our tax rate. So let's just do a quick visual check to make sure that is correct. 55,000 is in fact in this range, and there we have 25%. What I should be able to do now, because I locked that, is copy those down, and we can just check. The first one here is 10%, and then we have 90,000, which is in this range, and that is 28%. So that is the difference between approximate match and exact match. It's really just related to that last argument of true or false. Okay. So that is Vlookup. Everybody breathe. I will say, as we're going through this, I can't actually see the chat panel. So if you are asking me questions and you think I'm ignoring you, I'm not. It just disappears from my screen when I share mine. So if you have a burning question, if you can just note it down, and then I'll leave some time at the end for any questions that you might have. All right, guys, are we ready to move on to the next thing, which is Hlookup? Now, as I mentioned at the beginning, the only real difference between Vlookup and Hlookup is really how you have your data structured. So Vlookup stands for vertical lookup. And I will say that most of the data that you're going to come across is in a vertical format. For example, this parts catalog is in a vertical format. We have our column headings at the top and our data running down. But you might come across data that is in a horizontal format. So let's take a look at that. Now, I've gone for a little bit of a movie theme on this example. We're going to look up some information. So I want to be able to type in a film name, and I want it to return the year, the rating, and the genre. And I have this information stored off on the movie database worksheet. So again, just a reasonably small table. Now, currently, this data is structured vertically. So I'm going to flip this around so it's displayed horizontally, and then I'm going to show you how we can do an Hlookup. So this is going to show you a couple of other little techniques in Excel if you've never done this before. If you do quickly need to flip your data the other way around, you can use the transpose formula. It's not a formula. Well, there is a transpose formula, but this I find easier to use underneath paste special. So what we're going to do is we're going to grab this table, Control C to copy it, and I'm going to paste it on the other page down here. So if we jump up to the Home tab, click the lower half of the paste button, and jump into paste special, notice we have a transpose option just here. And when I click on OK, that's going to flip my data the other way round. So notice that we now have the column headings running this way, and all of our data is kind of running across the worksheet. Now, this is a really ugly way to display data. But you'd be surprised. Sometimes you do receive a spreadsheet that kind of looks like this, and you need to be able to handle Vlookups and Hlookups with it. So how do we do a lookup when it's structured this way? Well, the good news is it's pretty much virtually exactly the same as a Vlookup. So we're going to type in Hlookup. Take a look at the arguments, pretty much exactly the same. We need our lookup value. Well, our lookup value is going to be the film, comma. Our table array. Now, our table array is this big long table here. So again, I would probably give this a name to make it a bit easier. I haven't done that, so I'm just going to select the entire thing. Let's drag it across. Hopefully it's not too long. There we go. Let's go all the way back. Comma, row index number this time. So instead of a column index number, it's asking us for a row index number. So I want to pull back the year. So which row is year in? Again, we start from the top, 1, 2, 3, 4. So year is row number 2. And then we can specify if we're doing a true or a false. So we're doing the exact match of the film name. So we want a false on the end. Close the bracket, hit enter, and it's returning the year of 2016. Okay, let's do it one more time just so we can practice. This time I am going to put this data into, or I'm going to name the range. So let's Control A to select it all. Let's jump up to our name box. I'm just going to call this movies. And now if we do our Hlookup again, our lookup value is our movie. Table array, because we've named it, we can press F3. We can select movies. Click on OK. This time we want to return what the movie is rated, which is row number 3. And we want to do an exact match, so you can have a false or a 0 on the end. Close the bracket, hit enter. Okay, so really straightforward, virtually the same as Vlookup. So those are your different scenarios when it comes to using Vlookup. So now that we've said all that, I'm going to burst your bubble and tell you about the limitations of Vlookup. Because once you've been using Vlookup for a while, you'll come across scenarios where Vlookup just doesn't work. So let me show you an example. Let's jump across to the next worksheet. Now, what we have here, again, is a small table of data. We have some categories. We have some applications, and then we have the revenue that these applications have generated and the profit. So maybe these are paid for phone applications, something like that. And what I want to basically do over here is I want to be able to select an application and have it return the category, the profit, and the revenue from the table. So if I was to select, let's just say if I was to type in Doom, I can see that Doom is in the second column of this table. Now, the first thing that I want to return is the category that Doom belongs to. So effectively, I want to return the category of game. I can't do this with a Vlookup. Now, the reason why is because of the way Vlookup numbers. If you remember, Vlookup numbers columns from left to right, 1, 2, 3, so on and so forth. What we can't do is go backwards. So I couldn't say use Doom as the lookup value and then go back one column to find the category. It doesn't work like that. If you type in -1, it's just not going to work. So with Vlookup, the caveat here is that you always have to have your lookup value to the left of whatever it is you're trying to look up. But that doesn't happen in all scenarios like the one that we're looking at here, because I want to return the category which is behind or before this column. So this is where we have to use something else. And that something else is index and match. Now, index and match are two separate formulas in their own right, two separate functions in their own right. But you so often hear them kind of combined together because when you do combine them, they can produce really powerful and complex lookups. And it doesn't matter where your lookup value is in the table when you're using index and match together. So once again, this is something which people do tend to struggle with. I know a lot of people who find index and match really hard to understand. So let's walk through this slowly and hopefully all will become clear. Now, before we do that, I'm going to just throw in a little bonus tip because I don't want to have to keep typing in the application into this box, I want to be able to select the application from a drop-down list. So if you've never used data validation drop-down lists before, then you are in for a treat. I use these all the time. So we're going to create a list of all of our applications. For this, we go up to the Data tab, and in the Data Tools group, we have a Data Validation drop-down. So let's choose Data Validation. Now on this settings page, I want to create a list, and then I just need to provide the values that I want to be in that list. So I want a list of all of the apps, as simple as that. So now I get a drop down and I can select whichever one I want, and it just means I'm not having to type them in each time. Now that we've done that, let's take a look at index and match. Now, as I said, these are two separate functions. So we're going to look at each one individually so you understand what each one does, and then that will give you an understanding as to why they work so well together. So let's take a look at index first of all. I'm going to type in equals. We're going to go for index. Now, I think it's at this first stage people get confused because there's like 2 rows of arguments and people are like, oh, which ones do I use? The general rule here is for most things that you do, it's this top row that you're using here. And that's exactly what we're going to be using in this particular formula. So the first argument for our index formula is array. So what is an array? Well, an array is basically a range of cells. And the way that I like to remember this is your first argument, the array, is always the cell range that contains what you're trying to return. So we want to return the category. Where am I going to find the category? Well, I'm going to find the category in this range just here. That is always your array. I used to struggle to remember what that was when I was learning this formula. So I just remember that it's what I'm looking up, basically, the whole range that contains my answer, comma. The next argument is row number. Now, the app that I've got selected is Instagram. So if I look in the table, where is Instagram? It's towards the bottom. So if I count down till we get to Instagram, how many rows is that? So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. It's 9. So the row number is 9. Let's close that off and hit enter. And that's going to tell me that the category for Instagram is social media, which is correct. Now, that's all well and good. I've got a fairly small data set, but what if I had a data set that had thousands and thousands of rows? Do I really want to spend my time counting down in order to find that row number? No, I do not. So we need to find a better way of finding this row number, and that is where the match function comes in. So let's take a look at match on its own. I'm going to type in equals match. Now for the match argument, for the match formula, we have 3 arguments. The last one is optional. The match requires the lookup value. So what are we looking up? Well, we want to find Instagram. So whatever we have in cell H5. Where are we going to find Instagram? Well, we're going to find it in the apps list. Do we want to do an exact match of the word Instagram? Yes, we do. So we have a 0 on the end there. Close the bracket, hit enter. And would you take a look at that? It gives us the row number. So hopefully you kind of see how these work together. This match formula will generate the row number, and we can then feed that into our index formula to produce our lookup. So let's do the whole lot from the beginning. Equals index. We need to specify our array. Remember, it's what we're looking up. In this case, the category. Comma. Row number. Well, we want the match formula to generate our row number, so we go straight into our match. Our lookup value is Instagram, comma. We're looking that up in the apps list, comma. And we want to exactly match the word Instagram. So we have a 0 on the end there. We close off our match and we close off our index. Hit enter and we get the result that we want. So that is how you do a lookup with index and match. Let's do it again because practice makes perfect. This time we're going to look up the profit. So equals index. What's our array? Answers on a postcard. Our array, remember, is what we're looking up. So this time it's going to be the profit. Comma. Row number. We go into our match. Our lookup value, again, is H5. We're looking it up in the apps list and we're doing an exact match. Close off match, close off index, hit enter, and we get our result. And because we have this on a data validation drop-down list, if I change it to something else, all of these values update. Okay, so index and match used together is a really powerful way to perform lookups. I find that I use this more than Vlookup these days, simply because I know index and match is pretty much going to work no matter what I'm looking up and what data I have in my table, whereas Vlookup does have that limitation of the lookup value having to always be to the left of what you're looking up. Okay, so I'll leave it to you to decide which one you want to go with. Now, a very exciting formula that we're going to do next, because this is a reasonably new, I say reasonably new, it's probably been around for about 2 years now. That's new in Excel world, okay? We have another lookup formula called Xlookup. And this really takes all of the hard work out of index and match. So now that I've taught you index and match, I'm going to show you a quicker way of doing it that's a lot easier to use. Now, as I mentioned at the beginning, Xlookup isn't available in all versions of Excel. It is available if you have Microsoft 365, you should have access to Xlookup. Also, if you have Excel 2021, which is actually what I'm using here, the standalone version, the non-subscription version, you're going to have it in there as well. If you're not sure if you have it or not, just simply type in to a cell, any cell, equals Xlookup, and if you can see the arguments underneath, then you have access to that function. If you can't see anything there, then you're going to need to use index and match until you get an update and you get Xlookup. So let's have a look at Xlookup. We're going to use Xlookup to return the revenue just here. And I'll show you how much easier this is. So equals, oops, not two X's there, Xlookup. We have a lot more arguments for Xlookup, but notice that 3 of them are all optional. So you don't have to do these last 3. You can do a very basic Xlookup just with 3 arguments. So this is so straightforward. Xlookup, lookup value. What are we looking up? We're looking up Facebook, comma. Where are we looking that up? Where are we going to find Facebook? Well, we're going to find it in the apps list. What do we want to return? We want to return the revenue. So we just need to select revenue. That is it. Close the bracket, hit enter. So much easier than doing index and match. So much easier to remember. Now, in case you're wondering about those other arguments, let's just double click and go back in. These optional arguments on the end allow you to specify things a bit further. So if, for example, the word Facebook wasn't found in the table, I could specify text to return if it doesn't find the lookup value. So I could just put something in there like not found, comma. I can choose if I want to do an exact match, if I want to exactly match it or find the next smaller item or the next larger item, whatever we want to do. So I can do an exact match. And then the last option here is which way I want to search through my table. So this is something you can't really do with index and match. So with index and match, you can only search from top to bottom, at least with that basic formula. But with Xlookup, you can say, I want to search from the top to the bottom, or I want to search from the bottom to the top, which can be useful if you have duplicate values in your table. Also, if you have your data sorted, you have some options there for which way you're searching in your sorted data. And we're going to take a look at an example of this in a moment. Okay, so that is just what those additional options are on the end. We're not going to have those in this example. We're just going to have those basic 3. And I should be able to switch to something different and everything is going to update. Okay, so index and match and Xlookup. As I said, I'm a big fan of Xlookup, but it isn't available to everybody. So it's good to know how to do this using index and match as well. So let's move on to another example. And this is actually more of a practical example of how you can use some of those additional arguments for Xlookup. So what we have here is a little table which shows some employee names, the department they work in, and the last time they were absent from work. And what you'll notice is that the employee names, they repeat. So they're not unique in here. They repeat over and over again. So we have Gareth Osborne there. Do we have another one? Yes, we do. We have a couple of Aisha Jacobs. We have a couple of Tracy Bells. So there isn't just one employee. Sorry, one instance of an employee name. There's multiple. And what I want to find is the last time that this person was absent. Well, that is where we can use that argument in Xlookup. So if we go to Xlookup, our lookup value is going to be Tracy Bell. Where are we looking up her name? Well, we're looking it up in the employee array. What do we want to return? Well, we want to return the absent date. So that's this array just here. If not found, do I want it to say anything? I could type in some text there. If you don't want to type anything in there, you can just press comma to move on to the next argument. I want to exactly match the name Tracy Bell, so we're going to do an exact match there. But this time, because I'm looking for the last one, I want to go from the bottom of the list up. So I want to search from last to first. So I can have a -1 on the end there. Close the bracket, hit enter, and it's going to give me that last absent date. So that's just an example of those additional Xlookup options. Wonderful. Let's move on now to, again, taking a look at how we can do a lookup, or a two-way lookup, I should say. Now, with this, we have 2 lookup values effectively, and this is a scenario you'll come across quite often. What we have here are some months of the year running across the top, and then we have some travel companies in column A. And then in the middle, we have, these are sales figures for these travel companies from January to December. So what I'm aiming to do down here is I want to find the total sales for the company, but we have 2 lookup values because I want it to find April, first of all, and then I want it to find Go Explore. So what I'm looking for it to return is this value just here, the value we have in E4. But we need to do 2 lookups effectively. Now I'm going to show you how to do this using Xlookup again. So it's not that hard. We're going to go for, I keep typing 2 X's. I don't know why. Xlookup. Lookup value. Well, we have 2 of them. So let's start with the first one. The first lookup value is going to be the month, in this case, April. Where am I going to find that month? Where is my lookup array? Well, my lookup array is here, all the way across. I'm looking it up in these months. Comma. I then go into my next Xlookup and provide my second lookup value. So that's going to be Go Explore. Where am I looking that up? In this list just here. What do I want to return? Well, my answer could be anywhere in here. So I need to make sure I select all of those values. Now I could carry on and add in more options. I'm not going to. I'm just going to close off my first Xlookup, close off my second, and hit enter, and it's going to return my result. And if I check that in the table, I can see that yes, that is exactly correct. Now I don't have these on data validation drop-down list, but if I change this to February, I would expect this to update to 55,882. So just take a look at that formula again. Really straightforward. You're just doing 2x lookups within each other when you have a two-way lookup. Okay. Quite a lot to take in, I know, for Thursday evening. Let's move on to our last example. I should finish right on time today, which makes a nice change. I normally overrun, so this is good. Oh, actually, I think I've forgotten to show you one little thing, which I think is quite important, because this is also one of the newer functions that have been released in Excel. It's a very simple, straightforward function, but I use it so often, I want to show you it if you've never seen it before. It's called the unique function. Now, if we take a look at these employees down here, I've just gone back to this example because it's a good example to use. We have duplicates in here. So these aren't unique values that I have. Now, sometimes you'll want to basically extract from a list where we have duplicates. You just want to see what the unique values are. And a new lookup function is called unique. As I said, I use this all the time. And in its most basic form, if you just want to get a unique list of these names, you just select the range. Close the bracket, hit enter, and instead of all of these duplicates, you just get a unique list. So really nice and straightforward. I wanted to make sure I showed you that simply because I use this so often. Now, a situation where I might use this would be if I wanted to create a data validation drop-down list just here. If I was to use this range as my data validation list, it's going to include all of the duplicates. So normally I would just create a unique list and then create my data validation drop-down based off of this unique value range instead of this over here. Okay, so I wanted to make sure I didn't forget to do that because I use it so often. I want to show you. All right, let's move on to our final example, and then I'll let you go and enjoy your afternoon and your evening. This final example is about the choose function. And again, this might not be a function that you've used, and I'm going to show you it because, again, this is something that I use fairly frequently. So I wanted to show you it. I know a lot of people think, well, why should I use this when I can use Vlookup or something else? They don't really see the use of it. So I'm going to show it to you, and then I'll let you decide. And I'm going to show you why it has its advantages over some of the other lookup functions that I've already shown you. Now, the choose function is exactly that. It is a lookup function, and we're going to use it to basically find the department for each of these employees. Now, notice I have employee names in here, and then I have some codes assigned to them. And these codes relate to different departments. So I have another little table over here. We have 1 to 4 and the relevant departments. So I could use a lookup function and say, look up this in this little table and return the department. I could definitely do that. But I could also use the choose function instead. So let me show you how this differs. Now I'm going to widen out this column a little bit. And we're going to type in equals choose. Now choose has just 3 arguments here. And the first argument is the important one. That's the index number. So for me, the index number, this is what we're looking up basically. So this is cell B4, comma. Now I get to specify my values. So this is where it differs from Vlookup, because what I'm going to say here is this cell, and I'm going to lock it because we're going to drag this down. So we're going to press F4, comma, this cell, F4, comma, this cell, F4, comma, this cell, F4. Now you might think, what on earth is she doing there? Basically, I'm specifying what I want to look up in the formula. So it's going to look up number 1 in this case, and that number 1 refers to these different cells. So number 1 is going to be cell G4, which is effectively the sales team. When we drag it down, it's then going to look up number 3, which is going to be cell G6, which is marketing. Okay, so we're putting what we're looking up within the formula as opposed to having it in an external table. So if I now hit enter, it's going to return me what I want, and I can copy that down. Another way that people do this is instead of having these cell references, you could hard code your values into here. So instead of having these, I could put in quote marks, sales, comma, HR, comma, marketing, and then the final one, which is finance. I could have it like that instead, and it's going to give me the same result. Now, the advantage of doing it this way and having the actual values within the formula is that I could now go in and delete this table, and it's not going to affect any of my formulas because I'm not referencing that table. So if you have a scenario where you don't really want to have a big old lookup table, you could use choose instead to make it a lot neater, and it's just going to select from the options that you provide within the formula. Okay, so that is the major difference. Now I'm going to undo just to bring that back because I want to show you one final little thing. And again, this is something that I use all the time. Now, in the type of job role that I do, when I'm doing things like this, like webinars, the data that I use is not real data. It's not live data. It's just data that I've made up. And I find myself having to create data sets all the time. And it's a very tedious process having to type in employee names and things like that. So over the years, I've developed a way of making this a lot quicker for myself. For example, these employee names I've just grabbed off of a website that generates random names. So you can just type in 50 and it will generate 50 names. I copy and paste them in. So much quicker than having to type. What about if I want to generate some departments randomly for all of these people? Well, I could go through and start typing in, I want this person to be in sales in my fictional data list. I could carry on doing that. But again, if I've got thousands of rows of data, that's going to take a long time. And it might be that you want to do something like this to practice your Excel skills. Like finding data to use is a real problem, free data, I should say, because most of it you have to pay for, or, you don't want to end up stealing somebody else's data and using that. So being able to generate your own data sets quickly is a really good skill to have when you're learning or when you're trying to practice. So this is how I would generate a list of departments randomly for all of my employees. I would use the choose function, but I would combine it with the rand between function as well. Now, if you've never used rand between, this is probably my most used function. So what it will do is basically generate a list of random numbers between whatever you specify. So I could say, generate me a list of numbers randomly between 1 and 100. Close the bracket, hit enter, and it's going to generate me a number. I could drag it down and I'm going to get random numbers. So what I could do here is I could use rand between to generate numbers between 1 and 4 because we have 4 departments. So it's going to generate randomly 1 to 4. I can drag it down so that it assigns it to all of these employees, and then it will then just assign the department based on the number using the choose function. So let's combine them together. We're going to type in equals choose. I'm then going to go in to rand between. Because I have 4 departments, my bottom number is going to be 1 and my top number is going to be 4. Now I can specify meaning, or I can give meaning to those values. So if it's a number 1, it's going to be sales. I need to press F4 to lock that. If it's a number 2, it's going to be HR. If it's a number 3, it's going to be marketing. And if it's a number 4, it's going to be finance. Close the bracket, hit enter, and now when I double click, it's going to generate me all of those random departments based on this little table. Okay, so just another little trick that you can use. Consider using rand between because that is so useful in many, many different scenarios. Right. That is it, guys. That is pretty much everything I wanted to show you. Hopefully there we've got a good cross-section. I'm guessing most people came for things like Vlookup, index match, Xlookup. Hopefully we've covered those in enough depth that you understand, and hopefully it's become clearer. If you're a bit confused about those functions, hopefully that's made more sense.
If you're not a subscriber, click down below to subscribe so you get notified about similar videos we upload. To see the full course that this video came from, click over there. And click over there to see more videos from Simon Says It.